What if I told you that Carl Jung and Nietzsche discovered that our greatest strength doesn't come from the light, but exactly from what we try hardest to hide from ourselves, our own inner darkness? Before we dive deep into this life-changing revelation, if this resonates with you, please hit that subscribe button and give this video a like. It helps more people discover these profound truths that can transform their lives. Now let's explore something that might completely change how you see yourself. Picture this: two of history's most brilliant minds, separated by time, but united by a revolutionary understanding. Friedrich Nietzsche, the philosopher who declared that God is dead, and Carl Jung, the psychiatrist who mapped the deepest territories of the human psyche. Both men stared into the abyss of human darkness and found something extraordinary. They found power. You see, most people spend their entire lives running from their shadow. They pretend their anger doesn't exist. They deny their jealousy, their rage, their destructive impulses. They build perfect facades while their inner darkness grows stronger in the shadows. But Jung and Nietzsche, they took a completely different path. Nietzsche understood something that terrified his contemporaries. He realized that traditional morality, with its emphasis on being purely good and light, was actually making people weaker. When you deny half of who you are, when you reject your darkness, you're not becoming more spiritual or evolved. You're becoming fragmented, incomplete, and ultimately powerless. Think about someone you know who seems too perfect, too nice, too controlled. Have you ever noticed how they sometimes explode in unexpected ways? How their suppressed darkness eventually erupts? That's exactly what Nietzsche was talking about. The shadow doesn't disappear when you ignore it. It grows stronger. Jung took this insight and developed it into something revolutionary. He called it shadow work. The shadow, in Jung's understanding, isn't evil. It's simply the parts of yourself that you've been taught to reject. Your anger might be in your shadow, your sexuality, your ambition, your need for power, your capacity for destruction. But here's what most people miss: these aren't weaknesses to be eliminated. They're sources of incredible power waiting to be integrated. When you embrace your shadow, when you stop running from your darkness, something magical happens. You become whole. You become authentic. You become unstoppable. Nietzsche called this process becoming the Übermensch, the overman. Not someone who's superhuman in the comic book sense, but someone who's integrated all aspects of their humanity. Someone who's transformed their darkness into strength. Jung saw this same process in his patients. The ones who healed weren't the ones who became more perfect. They were the ones who learned to dance with their demons. They were the ones who stopped fighting their shadow and started working with it. Let me give you a practical example. So imagine you've always been told that anger is bad, so you suppress it. You smile when you want to scream. You say yes when you want to say no. You become what Jung called a persona, a mask that pleases others but betrays your authentic self. But what if your anger isn't the enemy? What if it's actually your inner warrior trying to protect your boundaries? What if it's your soul's way of saying, this isn't acceptable? When you integrate this shadow aspect, you don't become an angry person. You become someone with healthy boundaries, someone who stands up for themselves, someone with backbone. This is the alchemy that both Jung and Nietzsche understood. Darkness transformed becomes light, not the artificial light of denial, but the authentic light of integration. Nietzsche experienced this personally. His descent into madness wasn't just a breakdown. It was a breakthrough into territories of consciousness that most people never dare to explore. He stared into the void of meaninglessness and found the courage to create his own meaning. Jung's journey was similar. His confrontation with his own unconscious, documented in his Red Book, was a descent into personal hell that became his greatest source of wisdom. He didn't emerge from this journey as someone who'd conquered his darkness. He emerged as someone who'd learned to work with it. This is where most spiritual teachings get it wrong. They tell you to transcend your humanity, to rise above your animal nature, to become pure light. But Jung and Nietzsche understood that this approach creates spiritual bypassing. You can't transcend what you haven't first integrated. Your shadow contains your unlived life. It contains the parts of you that were rejected by your family, your culture, your religion, but it also contains your greatest gifts. Your creativity might be hiding in your shadow because you were told artists don't make money. Your leadership abilities might be there because you were taught that power corrupts. Your sensuality might be buried because you learned that desire is shameful. When you do shadow work, you're not just healing trauma. You're reclaiming your power. You're gathering the scattered pieces of your soul and becoming whole again. Nietzsche called this process amor fati, love of fate. Not just accepting what happens to you, but loving it all. The pain, the darkness, the struggles. Because without them, you wouldn't become who you're meant to be. Jung expressed this same idea through his concept of individuation. The process of becoming who you truly are requires integrating everything you've rejected about yourself, your light and your darkness, your strength and your vulnerability, your love and your hate. This isn't about becoming a dark person. It's about becoming a complete person, someone who's no longer at war with themselves, someone who's transformed their inner conflict into inner strength. Think about the people you most admire, the ones with real presence, real charisma, real power. I guarantee you they've done this work. They've faced their shadows and integrated them. They're not perfect people pretending to be good. They're whole people who've learned to work with all aspects of their humanity. This is why Jung said that the most terrifying thing is not that we're inadequate, but that we're powerful beyond measure. When you integrate your shadow, when you stop running from your darkness, you discover capacities within yourself that you never knew existed. But let me tell you something that might surprise you. Both Jung and Nietzsche discovered that our culture systematically creates shadow material. From the moment you're born, you're taught what's acceptable and what's not. You learn to hide parts of yourself to gain love and approval. You develop what Jung called a false self, a personality designed to please others rather than express your authentic nature. This process starts early. Maybe you were told that boys don't cry, so you stuffed your emotions into your shadow. Maybe you were taught that girls should be nice, so you buried your assertiveness. Maybe your family valued intellectual achievement, so you rejected your artistic impulses. Maybe they prized conformity, so you hid your rebellious spirit. Each time you reject a part of yourself, it doesn't disappear. It goes into what Jung called the personal unconscious, where it continues to influence your behavior in ways you don't understand. This is why you might find yourself attracted to people who express what you've repressed, why you might have strong reactions to certain types of behavior, why you might sabotage yourself just when things are going well. Nietzsche understood this dynamic through his concept of ressentiment. When you can't express your authentic nature, when you're forced to deny your true impulses, you develop a kind of poisonous resentment, not just toward others, but toward life itself. You become what he called reactive rather than creative. But here's the revolutionary insight that both men shared. This process can be reversed. You can reclaim the parts of yourself that you've lost. You can integrate what you've rejected. You can transform your inner division into inner unity. Jung called this the transcendent function. When you bring together the opposites within yourself, your conscious and unconscious, your light and shadow, your masculine and feminine aspects, something new emerges. A third thing that's greater than the sum of its parts, your authentic self. Nietzsche described this same process as self-overcoming. Not overcoming your humanity, but overcoming your limited ideas about what humanity could be. Becoming more than you thought possible by embracing rather than rejecting your full nature. This work requires tremendous courage. It means facing parts of yourself that you've been taught to despise. It means acknowledging impulses that your family, your religion, your culture have labeled as evil or wrong. It means taking responsibility for aspects of your personality that you've been projecting onto others. But the rewards are extraordinary. When you integrate your shadow, you gain access to tremendous energy that was previously locked away. You become more creative because you're no longer censoring yourself. You become more confident because you're no longer hiding from yourself. You become more authentic because you're expressing your whole nature rather than just the acceptable parts. But how do you actually do this work? How do you turn your darkness into strength without being consumed by it? This is where Jung's practical wisdom becomes invaluable, and where Nietzsche's philosophical insights provide the roadmap. First, you have to understand that shadow work isn't about acting out your dark impulses. It's about acknowledging them, understanding them, and finding healthy ways to express their energy. If you have rage in your shadow, you don't go around punching people. You might channel that energy into passionate advocacy for justice. You might use it to fuel your determination to succeed. You might transform it into the fierce love that protects what matters to you. Nietzsche understood this principle deeply. His concept of sublimation wasn't about suppressing your drives, but about redirecting them toward higher purposes. Your sexual energy becomes creative energy. Your aggressive energy becomes competitive drive. Your destructive impulses become the courage to tear down what no longer serves you. Jung observed this process in his own life and in his patients. He noticed that people who successfully integrated their shadows didn't become darker. They became more vibrant, more alive, more authentically powerful. They stopped wasting energy fighting themselves and started using that energy to create the life they wanted. Let me share something that might shock you. Both Jung and Nietzsche believed that conventional morality was actually immoral, not because they were against goodness, but because they understood that forced goodness creates hidden evil. When you repress your shadow, it doesn't disappear. It goes underground and starts influencing your behavior in unconscious ways. Have you ever noticed how the most judgmental people often have the darkest secrets? How the most controlling people are usually the most out of control inside? How the most perfect people often have the most imperfect relationships? This is the shadow in action. Jung called this projection. When you can't accept your own darkness, you start seeing it everywhere else. You become hypercritical of others because you can't face what you're criticizing in yourself. You become the very thing you claim to hate. But when you own your shadow, when you acknowledge your capacity for jealousy, anger, selfishness, and destruction, something beautiful happens. You stop projecting these qualities onto others. You become more compassionate because you understand that everyone struggles with darkness. You become more authentic because you're no longer pretending to be perfect. Nietzsche called this process becoming your own creator. Instead of following moral rules imposed by others, you create your own values based on your authentic nature. This doesn't mean becoming selfish or harmful. It means becoming responsible for your own moral development. Jung saw this same process in what he called the transcendent function. When you stop splitting yourself into good and bad parts, when you embrace the tension between your light and dark aspects, a third thing emerges, a new way of being that transcends the old dualities. This is where real strength comes from, not from denying your humanity, but from embracing it fully, not from being perfect, but from being whole, not from having no darkness, but from transforming your darkness into wisdom. Think about the greatest leaders, artists, and innovators in history. They weren't people without shadows. They were people who'd learned to work with their shadows. Their creativity came from their willingness to explore forbidden territories. Their courage came from their familiarity with fear. Their compassion came from their understanding of suffering. Consider someone like Winston Churchill, his famous black dog of depression, his capacity for ruthlessness, his stubborn defiance. These weren't flaws to be hidden. They were aspects of his shadow that he learned to channel into leadership during humanity's darkest hour. His ability to face the darkness in himself gave him the strength to face the darkness in the world. Or think about artists like Picasso, who channeled his destructive impulses into revolutionary art that tore down old forms to create new ones. His shadow aspects, his selfishness, his cruelty, his obsessions, became fuel for creativity that changed the world. Nietzsche's concept of eternal recurrence is really about this. If you had to live your exact same life over and over again, including all the pain and darkness, would you choose it? The person who can say yes to this question has achieved what both Jung and Nietzsche were pointing toward: complete self-acceptance, total integration, authentic power. But let me warn you about something. This work isn't easy. When you start exploring your shadow, you're going to discover things about yourself that you don't like. You're going to face parts of your personality that you've spent years trying to hide. You might discover that you're more selfish than you thought, more angry, more afraid, more petty. This is normal. This is necessary. Jung called it the dark night of the soul. Nietzsche called it the abyss. But both understood that you have to go through this darkness to reach authentic light. The key is to approach your shadow with curiosity rather than judgment. Instead of asking, "How could I think such terrible things?" ask, "What is this part of me trying to tell me?" Instead of trying to eliminate these aspects, try to understand their purpose. Your anger might be protecting your values. Your jealousy might be showing you what you truly want. Your selfishness might be teaching you about healthy boundaries. Your destructive impulses might be clearing space for something new to grow. Jung developed a technique called active imagination for this work. You dialogue with your shadow aspects as if they were separate beings. You ask them what they want, what they need, how they can serve your highest good. This isn't about getting rid of them. It's about integrating them into your conscious personality. For example, you might discover a part of yourself that's incredibly angry about injustice. Instead of suppressing this anger or feeling guilty about it, you could dialogue with it. What is this anger trying to protect? What values is it defending? How can this energy be channeled constructively? Perhaps this angry part becomes your inner activist, driving you to fight for causes you believe in, Nietzsche approached this through what he called self-overcoming, not overcoming your humanity, but overcoming your limited ideas about what humanity could be, becoming more than you thought possible by embracing, rather than rejecting, your full nature. He understood that most people live what he called a slave morality, following rules imposed by others, denying their own nature to fit in, becoming resentful and reactive. But the free spirit, the overman, creates their own values based on their authentic nature and their highest aspirations. The result of this work is what Jung called the individuated person and what Nietzsche called the free spirit. Someone who's no longer controlled by unconscious forces because they've made those forces conscious. Someone who's no longer at war with themselves because they've made peace with all aspects of their nature. This person has access to their full range of human capacities. They can be fierce when fierceness is needed and gentle when gentleness serves. They can be selfish when self-care is required and selfless when service is called for. They're not rigidly good or bad. They're fluidly responsive to what each situation requires. This is true strength, not the brittle strength of the person who's never been tested, but the flexible strength of the person who's been broken and rebuilt themselves stronger. Not the artificial strength of denial, but the authentic strength of integration. Jung observed that this process often happens naturally during what he called the midlife crisis. Around the age of 35 to 40, many people begin to feel that their carefully constructed lives are somehow empty or inauthentic. This isn't a breakdown, it's a breakthrough. It's the psyche's way of demanding integration, of calling you to reclaim the parts of yourself you've abandoned. Nietzsche experienced this process in his own life. His break from traditional philosophy, his rejection of conventional morality, his embrace of life's tragic beauty, all of this came from his willingness to face the abyss within himself and transform it into creative power. But you don't have to wait for a crisis to begin this work. You can start right now by paying attention to what triggers you. What behaviors in others make you irrationally angry? What qualities do you judge most harshly? These are often projections of your own shadow material. You can also look at your dreams, your fantasies, your guilty pleasures. What aspects of yourself emerge when you're not being watched? What do you do when no one's looking? These glimpses of your shadow aren't shameful secrets to be hidden. They're valuable information about parts of yourself that want to be integrated. Another powerful approach is to examine your relationship patterns. Do you keep attracting the same type of problematic partner? Do you find yourself in similar conflicts repeatedly? Often these patterns are your psyche's way of trying to heal old wounds and integrate rejected aspects of yourself. The goal isn't to become perfect, it's to become whole. It's to transform your inner war into inner peace. It's to turn your greatest weaknesses into your greatest strengths. As we reach the end of this exploration, I want you to consider something. What aspects of yourself have you been running from? What parts of your personality have you labeled as unacceptable? What would happen if you stopped fighting these aspects and started working with them instead? Jung and Nietzsche both understood that the goal isn't to become perfect, it's to become whole. It's to transform your inner war into inner peace. It's to turn your greatest weaknesses into your greatest strengths. Your darkness isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. Your shadow isn't something to be eliminated, it's something to be integrated. Your struggles aren't punishments, they're opportunities for transformation. The path that Jung and Nietzsche mapped out isn't easy, but it's the only path that leads to authentic power, the power that comes not from denying who you are, but from embracing who you are completely. The strength that comes not from perfection, but from integration. So I challenge you, stop running from your shadow, start dancing with it, stop fighting your darkness, start transforming it, stop trying to be perfect, start trying to be whole. Your greatest strength is waiting for you in the very place you've been afraid to look, in your shadow, in your darkness, in the parts of yourself you've been taught to reject. What will you discover when you finally have the courage to look? If this message resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more insights into the depths of human psychology and the path to authentic transformation. And remember, your darkness isn't your enemy, it's your greatest teacher. The journey toward wholeness begins with a single step into the very darkness you've been avoiding. Are you ready to take that step?